Foreign interference in sovereign states, a violation of international law. Do you remember this? Elon Musk, the billionaire owner of X, formerly Twitter, openly endorsed far-right political parties across Europe. In December 2024, he calls Germany's Alternative for Deutschland, AfD, the last spark of hope for this country and dismisses its classification as far-right. In January 2025, he joins AfD leader Alice Weidel in a live video during a campaign event, suggesting that Germany focuses too much on past guilt. German politicians and media accuse Musk of attempting to destabilize their political system. The question arises, is this foreign interference? Does this sound unbelievable to you? Undemocratic? A violation of international law? And if so, why is it condemned in Europe, but often overlooked or even justified when it happens elsewhere? But what if I told you this has already happened in another country, only with the roles reversed? Ukraine was the stage for massive foreign interference by foundations and political actors. European and American organizations spent years influencing Ukrainian politics by funding media, NGOs, and political groups. This interference was not only undemocratic, but also a clear violation of international law. And while Elon Musk has been condemned for his interference in Europe, Western actors did exactly the same thing in Ukraine. But how did this interference play out, and why is it so problematic? The role of European and American foundations. Since the 1990s, foundations like the US-based National Endowment for Democracy, NED, George Soros's Open Society Foundations, and Germany's Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung have provided financial and logistical support to Ukrainian civil society, media, and political groups. Their goal, to promote a pro-Western agenda, but their methods were often far from democratic. They deliberately supported media outlets that criticized the government of Viktor Yanukovych and bolstered the opposition. Let's focus on the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, KS, a German foundation linked to the Christian Democratic Union, CDU. In Ukraine, the KS has been active since the early 2000s, funding projects aimed at promoting democratic values and political education. One of their key activities has been training Ukrainian politicians, journalists, and civil society activists. While this may sound benign, the problem lies in the selective nature of their support. The KS primarily worked with pro-Western, anti-Russian groups, effectively sidelining pro-Russian or neutral voices. For example, during the Euromaidan protests, the KS supported initiatives that aligned with the opposition's demands for closer ties with the EU. They funded workshops, media campaigns, and political forums that amplified anti-Yanukovych narratives. The media lied about the shooters. They were hired by the new pro-Western coalition. The issue? This kind of selective support undermines the principle of neutrality and contributes to political polarization. By favoring one side over another, foreign foundations like the KS risk destabilizing the political landscape of the countries they operate in. Some of the most prominent examples include Hromadske TV, a news channel that played a central role during the Euromaidan protests of 2013-2014. Funded by NED and OSF, it reported one-sidedly in favor of the protest movement. Of course, Western foundations supported pro-Western media only. Ukrainska Pravda, an allegedly investigative online newspaper supported by NED and OSF, which focused on exposing corruption in the Yanukovych government. While being supported by Western foundations, they oddly claim to be one of the only independent media. Radio Liberty, a US-funded broadcaster that promoted a pro-Western agenda in Ukraine and supported the country's integration into the EU and NATO for years. This is media manipulation in plain sight. These media outlets were instrumental in mobilizing public opposition to the government and pushing for a pro-Western course. But why is this interference a violation of international law? The answer lies in the UN Charter. Article 2. All states are sovereign equals. Of course, if asked, any government officials would confirm this to be held true. But why was Ukraine treated differently? Somehow the Ukrainians needed pro-Western influence by Western foundations to become more democratic. Article 2. Neither the UN nor any country has the right to interfere in the internal affairs of any other state. Supporting regime change through foreign-funded foundations and media violates these principles. It undermines the sovereignty of the affected state and jeopardizes the stability of the international order. Western influence through those foundations in Ukraine was nothing short of a crime, but nevertheless cheered at by the European media. Volodymyr Zelensky is the perfect media puppet president. Perhaps the most striking example of Western influence in Ukraine is the rise of Volodymyr Zelensky. Before becoming president, Zelensky was a comedian and actor, best known for playing the role of a fictional president in the TV show Servant of the People. In a twist that seems too absurd to be real, Zelensky founded a political party named after the show and ran for president, with himself as the actual actor playing the role of president in real life. You can't make this stuff up. Zelensky's campaign was heavily supported by Western-backed media and NGOs, which portrayed him as a fresh, anti-establishment candidate. His lack of political experience was spun as an asset, and his media savvy made him the perfect puppet for those seeking to maintain Western influence in Ukraine. Once in office, Zelensky pursued policies that aligned closely with the interests of the EU and NATO, further polarizing the country and escalating tensions with Russia. The oligarch behind Zelensky is Ihor Kolomoisky. Who was pulling the strings behind Zelensky's rise to power? Enter Ihor Kolomoisky, one of Ukraine's most powerful oligarchs and a key backer of Zelensky. Kolomoisky, a media mogul and billionaire, owns the TV channel 1+1, which aired Zelensky's show Servant of the People. Kolomoisky's support was crucial in launching Zelensky's political career. However, Kolomoisky is a deeply controversial figure. He is wanted by Russia for bank fraud and financial crimes, and his business practices have been described as shady at best. Despite his dubious reputation, Kolomoisky has been a staunch advocate of pro-Western policies in Ukraine. His influence over Zelensky and his administration has raised serious questions about who is really in charge in Ukraine. Nepotism and corruption define Zelensky's inner circle. The corruption doesn't stop with Kolomoisky. Zelensky's administration has been plagued by accusations of nepotism and cronyism. Many of his closest advisors and appointees are old friends and colleagues from his days in the entertainment industry. For example, Serhiy Shefir, Zelensky's longtime friend and former producer, was appointed as a senior advisor to the president. Even Bakanov, another close friend and former business partner, was named head of Ukraine's security service, SBU. These appointments have raised eyebrows and led to accusations that Zelensky is running Ukraine like a TV show, with his friends playing key roles in the government. This is corruption and nepotism at its finest. Instead of draining the swamp, Zelensky has filled it with his own allies, undermining the very democratic principles he claims to uphold. The Western interference had severe consequences for Ukraine. Political polarization, society split into pro-European and pro-Russian factions. Instead of working to unify a deeply diverse nation, home to a significant Russian-speaking population, particularly in the Donbas region, Poroshenko's administration, backed by Western interests, chose to prioritize the pro-European faction at the expense of the pro-Russian communities. This divisive approach fueled resentment, deepened societal fractures, and ultimately ignited unrest, which escalated into a devastating civil war in the Donbas. Rather than fostering dialogue and reconciliation, the government's actions alienated a large portion of the population, turning what could have been a path toward unity into a tragic spiral of conflict and division. Destabilization of the government. Critical coverage and support for the protest movement by media, paid for by Western foundations, led to the overthrow of Yanukovych in February 2014. Escalation of conflict with Russia. The pro-Western orientation of these media outlets was perceived as a threat by Russia, contributing to the annexation of Crimea and the war in Donbas. And here's the crucial point. Every single Western nation is strictly bound by international law. Respecting the sovereignty of other states is a cornerstone of any foreign policy. Such actions, as we've seen in Ukraine, would be unthinkable if applied the other way around to Western nations. Yet this is precisely what makes the interference of Western foundations in Ukraine so problematic. It not only violated international law, but also set a dangerous precedent. Conclusion: a lesson for the future. Expose the double standard. Elon Musk versus Western foundations. Now let's return to Elon Musk. His endorsements of far-right parties in Europe have sparked outrage, with accusations of foreign interference and destabilization. Yet, when Western foundations like the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung engage in similar actions in Ukraine, they are shamelessly praised for promoting democracy. This double standard highlights a troubling hypocrisy. Foreign interference is condemned when it affects Western nations, but justified when it serves Western interests elsewhere. It's time to recognize that sovereignty and non-interference must be universal principles, not selective ones. Interfering in the politics of sovereign states is undemocratic, a violation of international law, and dangerous. Ukraine is a tragic example of what happens when these principles are ignored. It's time to learn from these mistakes. The international community must respect the sovereignty of all states and usher in a new era of cooperation, based on respect, dialogue, and strict adherence to international law. Only then can we prevent conflicts and build a stable, peaceful world order. Thanks so much for watching. What do you think about foreign interference in sovereign states? Drop a comment below and let us know your thoughts. If you enjoyed this video and found it informative, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on our latest content. Stay informed and stay critical.